I'm Glen Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. This month we'll examine the problems related to nuclear weapons. No, they did not go away after the end of the Cold War. In fact, the United States government is planning to build more and is planning for policies that will make nuclear weapons even more usable. The largest concentration of nuclear weapons any place on Earth is just 60 miles northwest of Olympia, or 20 miles west of Seattle, in Kitsap County at the Trident nuclear submarine base at Bangor. The government doesn't really want people to pay attention to nuclear weapons, just butt out and let the government do what it wants. But that's a dangerous approach. We need to pay close attention, and we need to stop this persistent danger, because it threatens all of survival on Earth. During this hour, we will learn a lot about nuclear weapons, and we'll learn how we can act to reduce their threat. We have three guests who will share a lot of information and some really wise and compassionate insights with us. And so I'm happy to welcome Ann Hall, David Hall, and Brian Watson. Reverend Ann Hall is one of the pastors at University Lutheran Church in Seattle. For many years, she was the pastor of University Baptist Church in Seattle. She's been arrested approximately 28 times, which is approximately once a year over these past 25 years. Good to have you here, Ann.
Good to be here.
David Hall, MD, is a child and family psychiatrist. He's been on the board of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, WPSR, continuously since 1983. In 1991 and 2002, he was elected for 2-year terms as WPSR's president. He served a total of 11 years on the National PSR board and also served a year as president of the National PSR level. Dr. Hall is also the author of a book, Stop Arguing and Start Understanding, 8 Steps Towards Solving Family Conflicts. Good to have you here, David.
Thank you, good to be here.
And Brian Watson is a longtime activist at the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, and that's located in Kitsap County, right next to the Trident nuclear submarine base. He lives in Bremerton. He's the father of a little girl. He's a talented sculptor, and he's been arrested a number of times in direct action, and he's currently serving a suspended sentence for an action in 2006. Welcome, Brian. Good to have all three of you here.
Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
In the introduction, I said that the end of the Cold War did not really solve the problems, and I think a lot of people assume that it might have. There's not much around about nuclear weapons in either the news media or in politicians talking, except when politicians and the news media talk about nuclear weapons, they're doing it in the context of North Korea or Iran, about what they might be doing, but they're not talking about what the United States government actually is doing.
Right.
Cold War ended nearly 2 decades ago. What are the current realities about nukes? Brian, you've got information?
Well, as you just said, most of what we hear is about what other countries are doing with regards to nuclear weapons. Very little is about what we are doing. The United States possesses about 10,000 nuclear weapons, actually more, but around 10,000. And of those, about 7,000 or so are actually deployed on missiles, on bombers, and on submarines. The Trident submarine system deploys about 35% of all our deployable nuclear warheads. And most of the Trident submarines are located right here in the Puget Sound area on 9 Trident submarines. The United States continues to maintain that its nuclear arsenal is a cornerstone to its military and security policy, and it shows no movement towards fulfilling its moral and legal obligations to disarm.
And the legal obligations come from like the Non-Proliferation Treaty and
Yes.
so forth that we'll talk about later on
Sure.
in the show. Could you summarize what the United States policies have been around nuclear weapons, both past and present?
Well, as you all know, the United States was the first, and thank goodness, the only country to have ever exploded nuclear weapons on cities. And in August of 1945, we all saw what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And you brought some photos to illustrate
Yes, I
that
did.
as well. We have
There are, the images are almost, we've seen them before, but it really is important when we talk about nuclear weapons to go back to these images and remember what happened to actual human beings when these bombs were dropped on these two cities. These are weapons that defy the imagination. They are so destructive that we cannot even imagine what they can do. And what we see in these photos from Hiroshima and Nagasaki is what happens to human flesh, what happens to cities, what happens to people's bodies. That is the reality of Trident. That is the reality of all our nuclear weapons. And we have to keep that in mind because we're going to be we talk in abstract forms,
Right.
but these things are quite real and their effects are quite real.
Yeah, and we do have a series of photos that we'll catch bit by bit as we continue to talk. What the weapons we have now, of course, are much more powerful than
Absolutely.
the ones
Yeah.
that we dropped.
The Hiroshima bomb was about 15 kilotons, and the Nagasaki bomb was about 19 kilotons. Just one of the warheads deployed on the Trident submarines out at Bangor, just one of them, the small one, is 100 kilotons. The large one is 475 kilotons. That's 475,000 tons of TNT equivalent. I mean, none of us, not even the nuclear war planners, can imagine that.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the United States dropped those in 1945. We were the first nation ever to do that, and we have a policy that is still a first strike policy. The United States is still prepared to initiate a nuclear war.
Absolutely.
Tell us about the first strike policy.
Well, the first strike policy is rooted in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because that was a first strike, obviously. And since the beginning of the nuclear age, the United States' goal has been to maintain strategic superiority over any nuclear adversary. We've gone through various periods in history where, for instance, the policy was described as being mutually assured destruction. You launch yours, I'm going to launch mine, we'll both kill each other, therefore there's peace.
Yeah, we break even.
Right. That's not quite the whole story, though. The United States has always pursued a policy of being able to launch a credible first strike. Now, it hasn't always been able to do that, but with the advent of the Trident weapons system, it was able to do that in combination with the weapons launched from missiles and bombers. The Trident system is a first strike weapon system. It is explicitly designed to be used first.
Yeah, and that's because of accuracy and the stealth of the submarine that it comes from?
Yeah, there are three things basically. The Tridents are basically floating mobile missile silos. Okay, that gives us a huge advantage over another country that doesn't have that ability. And Russia and China both have submarine-launched ballistic missiles, but not nearly of the caliber of the Trident system or the number. Mm-hmm. So there's the stealth of the Trident system. They leave port at Bangor, they go out in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, they disappear under the Pacific Ocean, and they can go anywhere. and they are gone, and they are undetectable. And they can launch their missiles from anywhere from the Pacific or Indian Ocean. That's where they patrol. The second thing that makes them a first strike weapon is the accuracy of the missiles and the warheads. Those warheads can hit a target within, I believe, 100 feet from over 4,000 nautical miles. And the reason why accuracy is important is because if you're aiming at a missile silo in Russia or China, you darn well be able to hit it and knock it out. Because if you can't, that thing's going to come back.
Right.
So the accuracy is extremely important if you're targeting missile silos.
Right.
It's not really important if you're targeting Moscow, because if you miss a target by 100 feet, it's not going to make a difference.
Right. So if it were like what people assume our missiles are for, which is defense, which is we would retaliate, you just need to lob something over there and it'll damage them.
Exactly. But these are explicitly designed to be used first. And my question to anybody who says that these are for deterrence is, why do we need the accuracy to target an empty missile silo?
Yeah.
Okay? If this thing is for deterrence, there's no point in targeting something at a missile silo that's empty.
Yeah.
The missiles already come at
Right.
us, in other words. That's why these things are first strike. The third thing is they're just the sheer numbers. There's a lot of bombs, a lot of warheads on these missiles, and those things can target many, many sites within Russia, China, any other country on Earth.
Well, and we have a diagram showing what a Trident could do to Russia,
Yes.
where the map of Russia may not be recognizable to us, but it's the light blue.
The shaded area there is Russia. This is looking down from space, and the red and yellow oval areas show the radiation fallout from a single Trident submarine. This simulation was done by the Natural Resources Defense Council several years ago, where they tried to figure out what one Trident submarine could do, and this is what they figured out. Yeah. This is 192 explosions, which is what a Trident submarine loaded with 192 nuclear warheads could do. And they estimated that such an attack would cause 52 million casualties in Russia, 49 million of those deaths. So that's one Trident submarine. There are 14 Trident submarines in the U.S. fleet. 9 of them are at Bangor. I mean, this is something that, again, we cannot even begin to grasp in our imaginations.
David, you have something to add?
Well, just that the Navy bragged that the C-4 missile could hit a baseball field. The D-5 missile, with its satellite navigation, can hit home plate in a baseball diamond. These are first strike weapons. Bob Aldridge, who was one of the designers of the original Trident system, actually left his job at Lockheed in, I think, about 1979, and was the one who alerted the local community here about Trident, and that's how the Ground Zero community in this area was born. Without that information.
A number of us have met him and read things that he's written and so forth. Yeah, he had I think 6 kids to support, and he quit his job even though he had previously been a designer of the Polaris Poseidon system. But when he found out what the criteria were, we want you to design a missile that'll do this and this and this, and he realized that's first strike. That's just so grossly immoral that he resigned. Even though he had 6 kids to support.
There's one other element, and that's that if you look back at the Sagan-Turco calculations from the early 1980s about the environmental effects of exploding nuclear bombs around the world in some kind of a mad mutual assured destruction exchange, when you get to the threshold of about 100 megatons of nuclear explosion, which is about what one Trident submarine is capable of launching, you get into what they described as nuclear winter, which is where the temperatures in the entire hemisphere will drop below freezing for a period of time up to about 2.5 or 3 months, where the entire hemisphere is frozen in a manner that kills agriculture, completely disrupts transportation and economies. One Trident submarine has the capacity to shut down civilization in huge areas of the Earth.
And it's not like we're protected by all kinds of good safety measures so that we don't have accidents. In the reading I've done over the last several decades, I've read about many accidents going back into the late 1940s of things, and you have information about other accidents and near misses.
Yeah, well, one of the greatest dangers that we have with the presence of nuclear weapons in our world is that they are just extremely dangerous technologies. And as we know, accidents happen. And they happen to nuclear weapons too. So we face two dangers. One is that there's going to be some accident just in their routine handling. The other is an accidental nuclear war. At Bangor in 2003, a missile was being raised up out of a Trident submarine into a tube, and someone had left a ladder inside that tube, and as that missile was raised up, the ladder punctured the nose cone and came that close to striking a nuclear warhead. And the likelihood was that if it did strike the nuclear warhead, the rocket itself, the missile fuel, would have exploded and dispersed plutonium and other radioactive material all over Puget Sound. So that sort of stuff probably happens more often than we'd like to know.
It was only a fluke that we heard about that anyway.
It was.
Mostly those are just covered up.
The news about that came out publicly, I think 2 or 3 months after the actual incident. So stuff like that does happen. The other danger is accidental nuclear war.
Yeah, you have an example of something that in the sky over in Norway.
Yeah,
that area.
And this is just the most recent thing that we know about. There have been others. But in 1995, after the Cold War had ended, mind you, in 1995, the Russians, a radar station in Russia picked up a blip on its screen of something leaving the ocean off of the coast of Norway. And Russia knows that Trident submarines patrol off of the coast of Norway. And so the word was passed up the chain of command that there's something coming towards us, and we think it might be an attack. Now, because from the moment of launch to the moment of impact from a Trident submarine to, say, Moscow is less than 30 minutes, that means they have less than 30 minutes to decide to launch. Now, we all know how difficult it is to make a good decision under pressure and with very limited time. Just imagine what the scenario, what their decision-making process was at that time. Well, what happened was they kept watching this thing, and they got very close to actually ordering their nuclear missiles to be launched at the United States. In fact, we came within 10 minutes of that decision, and for the first time in the history of the Cold War, the nuclear briefcase that's always at the Russian president's side was activated. And that's after the end of the Cold War. And that kind of risk is absolutely unacceptable for something that gives us absolutely no security whatsoever.
And what was the blip itself?
The blip itself, as it turns out, was a research rocket being launched from off the coast of Norway to study, I don't know, the weather or something. And the people doing that launch had notified the Russian government ahead of time. But the word didn't get through because, as we know, their infrastructure is a complete mess. So that's the kind of environment that we're living in today.
Thank goodness they decided not to launch.
Yeah.
But they could have.
They could have.
Very easily.
And we could make the same mistake very easily.
Yeah, and I've read just so many different things that have been near misses and accidents, all kinds of things And so far we've been lucking out, and you just can't play those odds forever.
The Cuban Missile Crisis was perhaps even closer than the Norway weather rocket.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was at the peak of the Cold War. I mean, it was really panicky. David, when we were preparing for the program, you mentioned the 1996 decision by the World Court about nuclear weapons. Can you summarize what that decision was?
Yeah, there was an NGO, a
Non-governmental organization.
non-governmental organization effort by a number of peace organizations around the world to get the United Nations General Assembly to ask the World Court, the International Court of Justice, which is the United Nations Supreme Court, to give an advisory opinion about whether or not the use or the threat of use of nuclear weapons was legal under international law. And in July of 1996, the International Court of Justice, which included a United States jurist, there were 15 jurists from around the world, the International Court ruled unanimously that in all but a very narrow specific circumstance, the use and or the threat of use of nuclear weapons would be illegal under international humanitarian law and the protocols that have been added to that law, the Geneva Conventions, the United Nations Charter, and so on. The one exception was just a possibility that if a country's physical integrity was in fact threatened, there was a possibility, not necessarily a right, but a possibility that there could be a justified use of nuclear weapons, and the court did not rule on that one specific situation. In all other situations, it ruled that the use or threat of use would be illegal under international law.
I have to just chime in and say that the World Court did unanimously say that even in that exception, that the use of nuclear weapons would still have to satisfy all the other rules and laws of war. And we all know that that's impossible.
Yeah.
So, they declared that nuclear weapons are illegal.
The basis of that was the inability of nuclear weapons to distinguish between civilians, non-combatants, and military targets.
Right.
Yep.
We have a long history of decades of treaties, various kinds of treaties about nuclear weapons, and what we keep doing is in the past we've negotiated treaties that allow us to not have to compete in those areas where the United States is really not needing to compete in anymore, but leaving unregulated the areas in which we do want to maintain our strategic advantage. So, for example, the SALT I treaty had allowed or had limited the number of missiles that can go up, but that was okay because we were developing multiple warheads for each missile, and so
Exactly.
the United States really wanted to make advances in the number of warheads that can come down, and regardless of the number of missiles going up. And so these treaties have been not very honest in some cases. And my understanding is that there's nothing happening now in the way of treaties. I mean, nothing. There's no new treaty is underway.
Nope.
There's the Moscow Treaty, which essentially dismantled the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which was designed between the United States and the Soviet Union to prevent the proliferation of missile defenses, which would then accelerate the development of offensive weaponry. But otherwise, the current U.S. policies have been to get the United States out of any of its prior treaty obligations, and we have been backing out of all the treaties, including the Non-Proliferation Treaty, basically on the assumption that the United States policy now is that the United States can and will fight wars on one, two, or more fronts at its will without any international right to comment.
And when we were preparing for the program, we talked about how you got into this. You had an interesting story back in 1982.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, in 1982, Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility sponsored a program called Target Seattle and talked to many audiences about what would happen if a nuclear bomb ever hit Seattle. And I went to one of those talks, and Dr. Judith Lipton she described the fire and the blast and the enormous casualties. And then she said, if a nuclear bomb hit Seattle on a weekday during the day, the children would be in school or in daycare, and their parents would be at work, and the children would die without their parents ever getting to them. And I had little children then, and I just couldn't bear the thought. Somehow, worse than they're dying without my being able to hold them. And I just felt like I have to do something about this. I was teaching first and second grade, and I just thought, what is the point of working so hard to teach these children to read when they may never grow up and need to read? And actually, when I told that story in a courtroom, Brian told a story about what started him on this work that was.
I was in
so well.
junior high. I grew up next to the Rocky Flats plant in Colorado, just west of Denver.
And that's a nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons facility that produced the warheads that are on Trident submarines right now. And I knew that Rocky Flats was a target, and I knew that if Rocky Flats was a target, that I would die. And so I just made up my mind, my own 13-year-old mind, that if we were ordered to go to the gym to crouch down on the floor and cover our heads, that I wouldn't do it. That I would somehow sneak out of the school and unlock my bicycle and pedal my way home so that I could be with my mother for the last 10 minutes of my life.
So I experienced this as a mother, and Brian is the child of a mother.
And it was that horror, that feeling of utter alienation and loneliness in those last moments that motivated me to learn more and to study this and to become involved.
Yeah. Now, the nuclear weapons don't exist only in a vacuum of nuclear weapons only. They exist in the whole context of U.S. foreign policy.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if somebody could kind of paint that picture for us as to how these fit in with our foreign policy.
Well, there's a misconception out there that nuclear weapons are only used when they're exploded. Nuclear weapons are a projection of power out into the world, and their power is largely symbolic. And so nuclear weapons are actually used all the time in a diplomatic sense, in a projection of power sense. Right now, you better believe that there are Trident submarines over in the Arabian Gulf, in the Indian Ocean, with the situation brewing with Iran. You better believe they're over there in the Far East with the situation with China and North Korea. They're there just as a reminder to other countries that we're here, and we have these things, and we are crazy enough to use them in the explosion sense. Their primary use is actually targeting Russia and China still, because those are our two largest economic, political, and military adversaries. And the primary purpose of our nuclear arsenal is to basically be able to get our way in the world in a military sense, an economic sense, and a political sense. It's an umbrella under which we can do what we want. And that's why we have the insane and stupid war that we are in right now. If we didn't have those nuclear weapons, I contend that there wouldn't have been a U.S. invasion of Iraq. But with this nuclear umbrella that kind of surrounds the world, we can operate with great freedom underneath it, without much fear that some other country is going to get in the way.
So they're being used even if the button isn't pushed.
Exactly.
And it's the same way as if an armed robber, if I were to go out and hold up a pedestrian on the street and have my hand in my pocket as if there's a gun, whether I have a gun or not.
Exactly.
But if I have a gun, or pretend like I have a gun, and say, give me your wallet because I have a gun in my pocket, the charges that the prosecutor would bring against me would be armed robbery.
Yeah.
And the law defines that as armed robbery, whether or not I pull the trigger,
Exactly.
and even whether or not I have a gun.
Yes.
And so in the same way you had mentioned on the international, the decision from the World Court, that it's the use or the threat of use that's illegal.
Exactly.
And that threat is always there, just like
The
you're
threat is
pointing out.
ever present because, and particularly because of the Trident system. It's a forward deployed system. They're on high alert status. They're roaming around the oceans at will. The other countries know that within 30 minutes they could be completely annihilated. That is an ongoing threat.
The United States policy has been a steady statement of a double standard where we go into Iraq because they have weapons of mass destruction. Okay? We are afraid of North Korea because they maybe have some weapons and maybe some missiles that might be able to get to Hawaii. Iran is clearly developing some nuclear capability, but the United States sits on the most active, the most accurate, the most deadly nuclear weapons system anywhere in the world. The Trident system alone is the closest thing that humankind has ever come to building a doomsday machine, a machine that could really generally just wipe out civilization. And still, U.S. policy, nuclear policy in the last 8 years has gone from a stance of not being willing to say we won't use them first, but being at least more coy about it. Currently, as of 2004, U.S. policy states that we will use nuclear weapons in the event of other weapons of mass destruction used against us, biological or chemical, or other situations of extreme military use. So we are explicitly on record that we will use nuclear weapons, and that legitimizes the use of nuclear weapons by any other country. We are fanning the cancer of nuclear weapons
We're
around the
provoking
world.
that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And they keep saying all options are on the table. All options are on the table.
right.
And you know what that means, and the other countries
Yes.
know what that means.
Yep.
And what other countries are figuring out is if they want to protect themselves, they have to develop their own nukes.
Absolutely.
Or even if they want diplomatic status in the world.
Yeah.
And to be listened to.
Exactly.
I mean, let's look at the situation between North Korea and Iran. I mean, North Korea, we've finally gotten some negotiations going on, and it looks like we might be able to get some disarmament agreement with North Korea. The only reason is because they have a few nuclear weapons and they have a missile delivery system.
Yeah.
Iran has neither.
Right. And
Okay.
that's why we push
And that's
Iran
why
around.
we're almost getting ready to invade Iran, I fear.
Yeah.
And so, every time we say that nuclear weapons have to be part of our security, that just gives the validity that it just gives validity to nuclear weapons that other nations need. Okay, we shouldn't be giving nuclear weapons credence. We should be taking credence away from them by disarming ourselves of them.
Well, that flows really well into the next topic. I want to look at the contrast between that kind of policy versus the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, which you're all involved with, because the whole ethic of Ground Zero, which is located up right next door to the Trident base in Kitsap County, the whole ethic of Ground Zero and the whole methodology is just contrary to what we've been talking about. Not only is Ground Zero working to get rid of Trident and all nuclear weapons, but is doing it in a way that's consistent with a peaceful intent by using real nonviolence. And you've been involved with Ground Zero for pretty much their whole history. They've been around since 1977, which is now 30 years, and you've been with them almost the whole time.
25 of those
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
Can you summarize what Ground Zero is and what they do, the history, purposes?
Well, Ground Zero began when the word came that a Trident base was going to be built here, and it began as a Gandhi would have called it an experiment in nonviolence, a way of studying and practicing nonviolent action in order to resist nuclear weapons in general and the Trident submarine system in particular. So it's always been made up of people who are absolutely dedicated to nonviolence and to figuring out how a nonviolent resistant presence can stop this system.
And we'll be talking about Ground Zero a fair amount during this part of the program. We want to let people know they have a website that has a lot of information. The website is www.gzcenter.org, and a local contact point in Olympia, where many of the people watching the program are, is through Alice Zyla at 360-357-7705. And we have a number of people. Bernie Meyer, who's been a guest on this program many times, has been heavily involved there, and Alice, and quite a lot of Olympia, a lot of Tim Russell, a lot of people in Olympia are active up there. Could you describe the philosophy and the practice of nonviolence? Because they do both together. You know, how does Ground Zero understand nonviolence, and how do they practice it?
Well, one thing that we talk about, pray about a lot, is that there is not a we-they in terms of responsibility for nuclear weapons. When we resist Trident on the Bangor base, we don't consider that the people on the base are our enemies and they're the bad guys and we're the good guys. What we consider is that every one of us in this country is responsible for the nuclear weapons that we have. We're paying for them with our taxes. We're benefiting from this imperial empire that those weapons protect. And so we need to we need to face the violence within ourselves, as well as a part of trying to resist the violence of the weapons.
Yeah, I remember the quotation about dealing with the tridents within.
Yes.
That Jim and Shelley Douglas, Ground Zero founders, used to refer to a lot, and other Ground Zero folks have.
And the belief that the power of love is stronger than the power of hate or of violence. And originally, when the weapons were coming in on the trains, we all made T-shirts that said "Love will stop the train."
Yes, yes.
And it did, actually.
Yeah, there were some good successes there. I know one of the things that I've always appreciated, one of the many things I appreciate, is Ground Zero has a newsletter that comes out periodically. And Brian, you were editing this for a while. And I always found this to be informative, I mean, richly informative. And even though it deals with frightening topics, it always had a very upbeat attitude. It was very positive. It was very much, we can do this. It's a can-do attitude. And what a great publication. And it's now being edited by Alice Zyla from Olympia, which is really cool for us Olympia folks. What else has Ground Zero done over the years?
Well, we've done a lot of a lot of leafleting.
Tell us about the leafleting.
We before 9/11, we were allowed to go right up near the gate at Bangor where the cars come in, and so we leafleted every Monday morning, I think. And at the height of the leafleting, there were 600 people on the base who would stop early, roll down their windows, ask for a leaflet, and then drive on to the gate. And those leaflets were posted all around the base, we learned, in ladies' and men's rooms and on bulletin boards. And actually, the time that we gave away most leaflets was when the commander of the base ordered people on the base not to take leaflets. And folks were so angry about that that everybody was stopping for a leaflet.
That's good nonviolence.
That was
That's
good.
the power of nonviolence. I remember quite a long time ago they were doing like on the before Thanksgiving they're baking small loaves of bread and handing those out with the leaflets and just
Right.
real,
Once we handed
real
out
people
apple
connections.
pies. And one time that I remember as such a story of what we leafleters and we resistors had in common with people on the base was that I was leafleting one day and it happened to be Halloween. And so I was wearing Groucho Marx glasses and nose and mustache. And I saw this car drive up toward me and the man was laughing. And I thought he must be talking with someone else, but he was the only one in the car. Well, when he came up and rolled down his window, he was wearing Groucho Marx glasses and nose and mustache. I thought, yes, we really are the same.
So part of what your methodology has to do with the relationships with people in the community, and including relationships with workers on the base, as you're describing, and also with the law enforcement people who arrest you. Tell us some more about the relationships.
Well, the relationships with law enforcement have been very, very good over the years. We always try to be transparent about what we're doing. We write letters before our actions to invite the sheriff and the commander of the base and the head of security on the base to come and be part of our actions. And so over the years, and we've talked always with the people who arrest us. And I remember one of the sheriffs used to, when we were arrested and brought down to his office, he would invite us into his office to talk with him. And I remember being very embarrassed one time because we got the creosote from the railroad tracks on our shoes onto his rug. So there have been good relations over the years. In fact, one of the things that happened after a while when the trains were bringing the warheads in was that the sheriffs had been arresting us on county property, and at one point we began to sit across the line onto base property, onto the federal property, and the base wanted the sheriff's office to come onto their property and arrest us, and they refused. They stood behind the line and said, no, if that's going to happen, the feds are going to do that. County's not going to do it.
And you sat there for quite a while, didn't you?
Well, one day on August 9th, we sat on those tracks for about 25 minutes while some of us heard the walkie-talkies, the argument going on, where the base people were saying, were telling the sheriff that he had to come, and the sheriff was saying no, and the Burlington Northern Guards finally said, listen, unless you get these people off the tracks, we're going to back this train up and take it away. Yeah. Yes. And it was at that point that they came to arrest.
Now, for a few years now, Ground Zero has had 3 large events every year. Martin Luther King's holiday in mid-January, Mother's Day in mid-May, and Hiroshima Nagasaki days in early August. What do those events commonly consist of?
Well, they're opportunities for people to actually go to the gates of Bangor and be in that place, as close as you can get to the largest concentration of nuclear weapons in the United States. It's an opportunity for people just to be in that space, to demonstrate their conscience and their opposition to nuclear weapons and their hopes and dreams for a nuclear-free world. And it's also an opportunity for people to engage in nonviolent direct action, to symbolically close the base. At all of these actions, there are a number of people who will actually go out into the roadway that leads to the Bangor base, and they will stop the cars that are coming onto the base. And I've done that many times. Both David and Ann have done that many times as well. It's usually a fairly small number of people who choose to do that, and you can certainly come to one of these demonstrations without any fear of being whisked away into the paddy wagon. That never, ever happens because of the kinds of communication that we have with the police beforehand.
And people who plan to get arrested go through some sort of a discernment process, and
Absolutely.
it's a well-planned thing, and the majority of people who are not being arrested are there as witnesses to that and in a supportive role.
Yes.
So, and there's never any arm twisting or pressure to
No,
do
absolutely
more than
not.
what you're comfortable to do.
Absolutely.
The point is to do what you can do, and maybe to stretch a little bit more into that space that's a little bit more outside of your comfort zone. Just being there is a very powerful thing, just showing up. Because these weapons are hidden, they're not talked about, they're not seen. It's important for the people at Bangor to know that people know.
Yeah.
And people don't want these weapons to exist anymore.
Do you have something?
Well, just in many ways, we are speaking for ourselves. We are speaking for the folks on the base who maybe are not able to speak about
Absolutely.
these things. You know, I'm a physician. I make a good living off, patients in the community, many of whom have direct financial jobs related to military, nuclear weapons, and so on. We're all a part of the same system. It's a matter of trying to be as clear as we can in conscience and action that we are in this together. That those of us that are able to act, able to stand on the side of the road, able to stand in the road, are attempting to speak for all of us on both sides of the base.
Absolutely.
I want to let the viewers see that for your next event, this program that people are watching now will air in Thurston County during April. And on Sunday, May 13 and Monday, May 14 is the annual Mother's Day event up at Ground Zero. And this flyer, there's a front and a back side of it, there's two sides to everything. I know you can't read it from where you're sitting, but just to show that it's a very informative flyer. It's on the website for Ground Zero. It's available now. People can download it, print it out at the website www.gzcenter.org. And the Olympia contact, if you happen to be an Olympia person, is Alice Zyla, area code 360-357-7705. So she's a contact who would have firsthand information as well. So anyway, that's available, and you always do great events. It's always meaningful to be there. Let's see. How do you see the Ground Zero experience or the movement related to Ground Zero and the overall context of moving toward disarmament?
Well, I think that Ground Zero plays a really important part in the global movement to abolish nuclear weapons because we're focusing public attention on, I think, the greatest threat to human survival, which is the Trident nuclear weapons system. There's no other organization in the world doing the work that Ground Zero is doing. And we are, as you just learned, very committed to nonviolence. We base our actions in love and in hope, not in fear, not in hatred or dread. We just try to do the best job we can to draw public attention to this thing because we realize that we, as activists, cannot make the change ourselves. It's the larger public that can make the change. And as long as the larger public doesn't even know about Trident, then they can't demand the change from their elected officials. So it's our job to raise Trident up, to make it visible, so that people can take some kind of action to stop it.
David, you're active also with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, an organization of medical people, not just doctors, plus other people can join as well, that work on peace issues, especially nuclear weapons and the radioactive problems at Hanford and so forth. You've been there a long time. Active with WPSR.
Yes, with both WPSR, with National PSR, and with Ground Zero.
Yeah.
As a physician, as a child psychiatrist, a family psychiatrist, I spend intense time with individuals and families trying to help them sort out the conflicts in their lives, trying to find meaning and connectedness in their lives. And from the very early time in my training, with the threat of mutual assured destruction in the world at that time, it was just very clear to me that I could spend thousands of hours with individuals and it could be wiped out in a moment with a nuclear conflagration. So I've been involved as a practicing physician working with individuals and families and some of the broader community public health, and then working through Physicians for Social Responsibility on policy issues at the national and state and local levels. And then with Ground Zero as the sort of the direct heart, personal commitment and prayer, if you will, that these weapons will never be used. A part of the prayer is that the folks who in fact have their hands on these weapons, the Navy commanders and everybody under them, will be very professional and very careful that these weapons not be misused, that they not be that there not be accidents, that they be highly responsible. We depend on those folks to keep us at some level safe until the community can come to a consensus that these weapons need to be eliminated. Yeah. The medical model that I think most clearly defines nuclear weapons is cancer. Nuclear weapons are a major worldwide cancer in the body politic, and it's up to physicians and other health-minded folks, other folks that want a community that has a capacity for peaceful coexistence. We have to treat the cancer, we have to eventually eliminate the cancer, or it will seriously injure and perhaps kill us.
Yeah. Oh, I really want to support Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. We've had several programs where we've had people from WPSR as guests dealing with Iraq and the civilian casualties from the economic sanctions and so forth, and just various issues. We've always got PSR people. They've been doing some good work on Beyond Oil, getting beyond peak oil and so forth. So I want to put in a plug for the website and then the phone number again in Seattle. The website is www.wpsr.org, and the phone in Seattle is area code 206-547-2630. And we've had Martin Fleck, the statewide director, as a guest on our program as well. We're running a bit tight on time, but we want to make sure that we have a chance to find what solutions you have beyond those that we've talked about. So regarding nuclear weapons policies, how could we reduce the risk?
Well, the first thing we need to do is bring all the Trident submarines back to port immediately. That would incredibly reduce the risk of accidental nuclear war. The second thing we do is we start taking the missiles off of the submarines, and we start taking them out of the missile silos, and we take the bombs off of the bombers, and then we start taking the warheads off of those missiles and putting them several miles away, and then even further and further. This process is called de-alerting. And just for an analogy, it's like taking a loaded handgun that's got the safety unlocked, ready to go. In de-alerting, the first thing you do is you lock the safety, and then you take it take the bullets out, and then you destroy the gun, and then you destroy the bullets. This is what has to happen with nuclear weapons, and this could be done between Russia and the United States without the kind of treaty rigmarole that we've had to do before. It'd be very simple to do.
And these are all confidence-building measures.
Absolutely.
Confidence-building measures, CBMs, are a way of kind of a mutual, incremental step toward peace, where each one reinforces the next. We have just actually a couple minutes left. David, you had mentioned on the phone when we were preparing for the program that the Trident System is coming up for billions of dollars of renewal coming up in the years ahead.
In about 2015, the appropriations process will begin for replacing the Trident system, which comes, basically exceeds its age beginning about 2029. So the decision to replace Trident, which is currently going on in Britain, will hit us probably around 2 or 3 years from now. They'll start the build up towards appropriations
so
to continue.
we can start organizing around that to shut the thing down.
There's also the Complex 2030, which is the current administration's effort at rebuilding the entire bomb-making complex, and that's in Congress right now. That's a major issue PSR is working on.
Yeah, we're down to our last couple of minutes. I know that there are a lot of things for people to do at the grassroots level. When we talked on the phone, Ann, you said, whatever you're doing, figure out what your next step is, whatever that might be.
Yes.
You'd mentioned that. We want to make sure we promote Ground Zero and all of the other peace groups that are doing things. It all fits together. But a lot has to do with informing public opinion, as we've been saying, and encouraging people to kind of stretch your comfort zone. We want to get like just a couple seconds from each of you as a closing statement, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
I just want to invite viewers that whatever it is that you're doing, if you're praying about this, try praying out loud at church so that people can join your prayers. If you've written a letter to your senator, write another and write to the newspaper. If you've watched a demonstration, come out and join us for one at Ground Zero. Come on Mother's Day on the 13th and 14th of May. We would love to have you.
Great, thanks. David, briefly?
Yeah, this is a problem that's decided at the federal level, so be sure you elect and talk to the federal representatives that are making the decisions about these weapons.
I just want to say, do what you can do, but also do what you can't do. Do that thing which really scares you, because that's where social change really starts to happen.
Okay, thank you. Each of us has a conscience, and we need to take responsibility for what we can do. I appreciate the guests. And for more information, you can contact the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, www.gzcenter.org. In Olympia, you can call 491-9093. We have a lot of information through the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. We're all one human family, and we all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.